In the Bible, there's a familiar passage, Luke 19, 1 to 10. And if I had to avail to you a theme or a title for our next few moments together, I would suggest to you an unorthodox posture for Orthodox worship. An unorthodox posture for Orthodox worship. An unorthodox posture for Orthodox worship. Allow me to read the scripture for your hearing. Luke 19, 1 to 10. He, this is Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small of stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. An unorthodox posture for Orthodox worship. Have you ever wanted to experience something or someone so persistently or so intensely that you would do whatever was necessary to be in position, to have proximity and posture to engage? I'm a musician, and one of the joys of a musician is that I tend to musically geek out on other great musicians. We have a number who are here in our midst in the seminary. And if you've ever seen a musician who likes to geek out on other musicians, we get in the strangest positions, the strangest proximity, the strangest postures. Like for me, the best seat in the house right now is in this catacomb right over here. I mean, it's in the space that nobody really wants to sit in. Why? Because I can look over the shoulders of Tiffany as she plays, or I can look over the shoulders of Karis as she plays, and I can look over the shoulders of the great musicians to see how they play, their performance practice, their posture. I can see how the agility and the dexterity of their fingers move, how they breathe. I want to see how they connect with the music, how they articulate and phrase and experience what they're doing. When Grace is playing, I want to look over her shoulders. I don't want to sit out here in the choice seats. I don't want to sit in the nosebleeds or in the VIP section. I don't want to sit in the mezzanine or the orchestra seats. I want to sit overhanging where the musicians are, so that I get a good vantage point, that I can see what I need to see. Have you ever sat in the midst of one of the greatest preachers of your generation, just to be invited to the study before that preacher executes their homiletical task of the day, just to see how they sit before the Lord, just to see how they prepare? Have you ever taken a glimpse at their notes, if they have any, or their outline or their script? Some of the greatest preachers have color-coded sequences on these little papers, and they're green for talk loud, and red for talk soft and slow, and blue for the pregnant pause that works so well. Have you ever been in the midst of a great mentor who avails themselves so that you can just sit there and enjoy being in their presence and asking them every question that's on your mind. They never get tired. They never get bored. And it seems that as you grow weary thinking about how much they might be tired, they just get more excited and more amplified and more jazzed up for this engagement. Have you ever been amongst somebody who brings you so much joy that you just can't stand not to be around them? That's a double negative. That means you want to be with them. I mean, have you ever experienced where something so majestic and divine is not only pulling you, but pushing you towards? Zacchaeus, a descendant of Abraham, he's Jewish. He's a chief tax collector. Now let's look at this for a second. He's not only a tax collector, but he's the chief tax collector. I mean, if there were VPs and directors and SVPs and EVPs and assistants and associates, this guy was the top of the hilt. He was the chief tax collector. The Bible also says that he's rich, he's wealthy, he's of nobility. One of the things we understand is that the tax collectors came from the neighborhoods and the communities. So they were kind of not well liked, but well known, right? I mean, that was Mrs. Smith's son, Zacchaeus, right? Who grew up around the corner and down the street, who we played ball with in the street. And somehow he was picked by the government to take this job, and he moved up and moved up and moved up. And every time it was time to pay our taxes, one of his people came around. And maybe we can compel him to give us a little bit of generosity because we knew him. But perhaps it was because we knew him that there was no generosity. So he was kind of well respected and kind of well loved and kind of well known and kind of renowned, but not really. I mean, all of us have Uncle Sam. I don't know how you feel about your Uncle Sam, but we all have an Uncle Sam in kind of fellowship together. We all have the Uncle Sam. And I don't know how you feel about Uncle Sam, but it's almost like Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam's in your family, but not really, right? Only around April 15th and, every quarter or so, Uncle Sam shows up, right? But not really. I mean, Zacchaeus is kind of like that uncle that we all kind of have but not really have. And people know him but don't know him and love him but don't love him. But then the Bible makes clear that he's short in stature. Now, the word stature could mean either maturity or it could mean height. The reality is that it could mean both. But it also could be a metaphor. He had everything, but he was still insecure. He had the position, the prestige. He had all the things that one would aspire to professionally or career-wise, but yet there was still something missing. He was, as we say in the vernacular, coming up short. He wasn't at full hilt. He wasn't at full capacity. He wasn't at full volume. He was short in stature. And clearly it could mean that he was X amount of feet, X amount of inches. I don't want to offend anybody, so you fill in the blanks. But he was also missing something else. And in this moment, Zacchaeus was seeking to see who Jesus was. Jesus is now in the midst of doing great ministry, working miracles, traveling from place to place, and is well known, well beloved, and also well hated. And folks wanted to see and experience who he was. Like the great musician that comes into town to concertize, and you just have to get tickets to go see that concert because you want to experience them in real life, or that great preacher who's doing a revival in the area and you have to take that night off so that you can experience them in real life, or the great mentor who invites you to his or her home. You drop whatever you have going on to be able to experience that in real time. Jesus, this miracle worker carpenter, is coming to town. And Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector of great nobility and wealth, drops whatever he has to do. Now let's think about this. Not only does he have servants and subordinates, not only could he have leveraged his power and position and prestige and platform to summon Jesus to him, he chooses, of all things, to climb up a sycamore fig tree. If you've ever seen one of these trees, they are wide in girth, they're tall, they have thick branches. And they overhang kind of wide, sometimes low, sometimes tall. But this chief tax collector chose to climb up this tree to see who this Jesus was. Now, those of you who have been in classes know that I love rabbit trails. You know that I'm the tangent master. I like to take little detours, and so here's a detour for you. Zacchaeus was clearly busy. He was a well-scheduled person with tons of priorities and obligations. He had assignments, he had meetings, he had exams, he had reports, etc. He had all these things to accomplish. And yet there was something still so urgent for him to engage with Jesus. It may have been, just like now, finals time. Perhaps in his own profession, it was income tax time. It was time for him to really pull out the spreadsheets, pull out the address directory, and figure out who had what, when, and where, and who he needed to collect from. But this opportunity to engage with Jesus face to face, eyeball to eyeball, was more important than all of that other stuff. There's something about worship, our engagement with God, where God invites us and wants to see if we will accept the invitation. That could be, or I'm going to say will be, and should be, or must be more important than every other commitment you have on your calendar. We'll bracket that side note and get back to our scheduled show here. Zacchaeus was seeking to see who Jesus was. Now, our worship is based on our desire to see and to seek who Jesus is on a regular and consistent, intense and intimate basis. It is our interaction, our engagement with Jesus that propels us to never want to miss it ever. I mean, Jesus is like the best date you've ever had. I mean, being with Jesus is understanding what true love is. I mean, Jesus is the one who will love you when you don't even love yourself, will encourage you when you don't feel encourageable, will challenge you to be your best, even when you feel at your worst. Jesus is the one who will pick you up out of the bed when you feel paralyzed, in stress and chaos and frustration and confusion. Jesus is the one who will help you to see the future when all you can focus on is your history. Jesus, the very engagement with Jesus challenges us to want to spend more and more and more and more time with Jesus. And so I understand why Zacchaeus, having heard about this mysterious, majestic carpenter, wanted to experience him for himself. Don't you know that when you have a life-giving experience with the life-changing Messiah, your life is never the same? So Zacchaeus, the noble chief tax collector, takes a rather unorthodox posture. he climbs a sycamore fig tree ahead of the crowd. I mean, he takes the navigation tools and figures out the route that Jesus is going to travel, and he figures out the proximity and the distance, and he figures out the timing, and he gets to a specific tree, risking it all. If Jesus would have took an audible route, if Jesus would have took a detour, if Jesus would have stayed somewhere too long, he risked it all to climb up on this tree and to wait and wait and wait and wait just to be in position, proximity, with a posture to see the Messiah. How many of us are willing to take an unorthodox posture just to see Jesus? Are we willing to have courageous conversations so that Jesus can show up and help us to reconcile? Are we willing to postpone an important event only briefly to invite Jesus to show up and be a participant? Do we do the unthinkable so that Jesus is honored and God is glorified? Do we believe in the one who came to save all? So Zacchaeus climbs this sycamore fig tree in order to have orthodox worship. He wanted to see Jesus for himself. He wanted to be in a position and proximity and posture so that he can experience Jesus for himself. He wanted to see what would happen if he was able to engage with Jesus. And as a result of his sacrifice, Jesus not only sees him, not only hears him ruffling up in those fig leaves, but he calls him by name. And he invites himself to stay at Zacchaeus' house. I got to pause because I'm about to get excited about what I'm about to say. It's like that prophetic thing of knowing what's on the paper. Amen. I'm thinking about it here. Isn't it the epitome of worship that God incarnate would see us, would hear us, and would call us by name and invite God's self to come and be with us? I mean, isn't that the very, and I told you I was going to get excited, the very nature of what worship is, to bring your baggage, to bring your challenge, your brokenness to a place just so Jesus can see you and hear you and call you by name and invite himself to come and indwell with you, to come be in intimate relationship in your home. I mean, the very nature of why we worship is to engage with God and to have this wonderful, intimate relationship. And here it is, Jesus in the crowd. If you want to deal with the stature issue with Zacchaeus being too short, Zacchaeus had to climb up a tree to elevate himself amongst the crowd, hoping that Jesus at some point would look up. If it's about his insecurities or about his own self-confidence issues, the fact that he had the courage to fight the fear, to climb the tree, and to be by himself and not amongst the crowd. Zacchaeus couldn't hide up in the tree. You had a human being sitting in a tree. There's something weird about that, folks. There's something relatively unorthodox about that. We come into the chapel and we sit here. We don't kind of strap ourselves from the ceiling and propel ourselves down. There's something unorthodox about that posture. But the unorthodox nature of it, because of his desire to see who Jesus was, makes it orthodox. When you take your brokenness and don't succumb to the fear and don't succumb to the shame and don't succumb to the challenges of our human depravity, but allow yourself to be strong enough, encouraged enough, and bold enough to seek ye the face of the Lord, there's something unorthodox about the posture, but orthodox about the worship. When we think about confessing, when we think about washing feet, when we think about all the things that seem so weird and peculiar and somewhat unorthodox, those are the things that put us in the appropriate position and proximity and posture so that we can have orthodox worship. Verse 8, Zacchaeus, he does his confession. He says, "Behold, Lord, I know I'm a noble, wealthy chief tax collector, but half of my goods I give to the poor." And he said, "If I've ever defrauded anybody, I give them 4 times what was owed to them." He confesses. He confesses. He didn't say if. About the half of the goods. He says if when he talks about defrauding. So here's the understanding here. It was a practice for him to be a good steward of his resources. And it was a practice of him to have integrity and accountability because he understood the position that he was in. And he understood the reason that people hated him was because other tax collectors stole from the people. So he was a good steward by always giving half of his goods. And he held himself in accountability with integrity by having his own praxis that if he should ever defraud someone, it's 4-fold. But then, verse 9, Jesus responds and said, "Today, salvation has come to this house." He acknowledges him as a son of Abraham. And he says that I, the Son of Man, have come to seek and to save the lost. Zacchaeus climbed the tree because he was seeking to experience and see who Jesus was. But the real one who was seeking Zacchaeus was Jesus. Jesus' closing words in the passage that I, Son of Man, came to seek and to save the lost. Our position, our proximity, and our posture. We're going to have to learn how to be uncomfortable and to be comfortable being uncomfortable so that Jesus can do what Jesus is going to do. Following Jesus means that we have to move outside of our senses of comfort. I give thanks to each and every one of you because this semester you've been uncomfortable. And I give God all the glory because our goal was not to shock you or to stunt you or to create a sense of uncomfortability, but to show you the power of God, the move of the Holy Spirit when you allow yourselves to be uncomfortable to experience it. We prayed in tongues. We've danced like adolescents. We've even done some auto-tune up in here. We've moved, we've shaken, we've stirred it up, and we are better for it.